Welcome to Conversations with Leaders. I'm Ishit Vachhrajani. I'm an Enterprise Strategist with AWS. And I'm very excited to be joined by Don Weinstein, Corporate Vice President of Global Technology and Product at ADP. Don, thank you for joining us today and welcome. Can you please introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you and ADP.
Yeah, for sure. And pleased to be here. So I'm Don Weinstein. I'm responsible for all of ADP's global products as well as internal technology worldwide. It's a little bit of an unusual dual role, but effectively anything and everything that has to do with technology runs through my office. ADP, we're the world's largest payroll and human capital management provider. We provide service to over 860,000 clients in more than 140 countries, and we pay more than 40 million people worldwide. And so chances are, if you know us well or not, but chances are you've been paid by ADP at some point in your career. So pleasure to be with here and look forward to the conversation.
Well, thank you, Don, for joining us today. And that's a fascinating scale of what ADP does. Now, if we look back at last year and how pandemic unfolded, from the initial onset to just the need to quickly pivot to working from home, to then really reimagining maybe part of your business processes in how you help your customers adopt to the new normal. And now probably some of the companies are thinking about bringing employees safely back to work in some cases. How did you lead through that change? Could you please walk us through how you responded to these different phases?
Yeah, and you definitely hit all the major phases there. I think the early days were a mad scramble. Like many organizations here in the US, I think we'd had a long tradition of folks, working either part-time remotely or at least remoting in. But as a global organization with half of our workforce outside the US, we had to quickly pivot and enable our associates and our entire organization to become a virtual organization. And that meant scrambling around trying to procure equipment. In some cases where we couldn't get laptops, we would buy as many wireless cards as we could and stuff them into associate desktops so that they could take those home with them. And then of course we never really designed our network in a way to have our entire 60,000 person global workforce remoting in. So we had to boost our VPN capacity on the fly. In many cases, we were backhauling traffic around the world just to take advantage of time zone differences and be able to balance out overall capacity. Through it all, the most important thing that we used from I would say a management technique in order to keep the operation moving, to keep our associates engaged and focused, was just about increasing communications. But the second thing I think that was really critical in all of this was to make sure that we were conveying confidence and trust to the workforce. At ADP, we have our ADP Research Institute that does a lot of really groundbreaking studies in the field of people at work and workforce engagement and the like. And we just completed a global resiliency study that looked at the impact of the pandemic on the resiliency of the workforce. And one of the findings that came out of that, not surprisingly, was that trust in leadership was one of the critical driving factors for workers being more engaged and more resilient through the pandemic. And in many cases, what that boiled down to was just being honest with folks, not trying to make promises that you couldn't fulfill, but giving folks a sense that, hey, when leadership says something, they're going to commit to it, they're going to do it. And for us, that meant not trying to make specific predictions around, hey, we think we're going to be back in the office 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 12 months from now, because nobody really knew, but rather saying, hey, here's what we're going to do this week, or here's what the priorities are for this day. And making those commitments and sticking to them really was a critical tool for just keeping the entire workforce engaged and focused through the transition.
That's incredible, Don. I really love the fact that you highlighted how important the communication is, and increasing the frequency of communication is, especially in the time of uncertainty like we have been experiencing. You talked about transparency as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about how do you see transparency and trust, and how do you use data and analytics to foster that?
Yeah, well, it's a big area of focus for us. You know, ADP, we sit on multiple petabytes worth of data. As I mentioned, you know, when you're paying 40 million people every pay period, and then with the turnover in the workforce, we'll see many, many more than that over the course of a year. So we have incredible data and data assets, but the data that we have is obviously sometimes quite sensitive in terms of individuals' pay or other kinds of personally identifiable information. So, of course, first and foremost, we fully anonymize and then aggregate the data that we do use. We have kind of a separation of church and state, if you would, between production system data and that what goes into our analytics, and so that we don't have any teams crossing the streams there. But you know, we try and take it a step further, and so by way of example, recently we launched an AI ethics board internally to provide governance and oversight into our use of data. And in particular, it's a blended board where we have internal resources, including our general counsel and our chief privacy officer. But we also invited externals to sit on the AI ethics board. So we have an external counsel, as well as someone from the field of academia, to provide that outside-in checkpoint on what we're doing.
Absolutely, and such an important point that you bring up there around ethics in AI, and how you are sort of bringing in external thought leadership, an external set of eyes as well, helping you define that. I'm very sure a lot of our executives who are listening to this will be interested in learning a little bit more. Could you share a little bit more about the AI ethics board and how it functions, and some of the charter and the kind of work that it does?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the first thing that we did is, back to your point about transparency, we published this all externally on our adp.com website, because it's, you know, really not very transparent to have an AI ethics board or a set of principles that we keep to ourselves, closed off. So the AI ethics board, it meets quarterly, and it has governance and review, in particular over any kind of new models that we're developing, so that they can weigh in early in that development process and identify potential blind spots. You know, even in some cases, it's just about making sure we have good guideposts in terms of how far we do or don't want to go up that spectrum of providing data to insights, even to recommendations, but maybe not necessarily all the way to the decision side. I'll give you a very recent example of it. Something that we launched quite recently is we have a sizable business providing retirement services, 401k plans, particularly to small and mid-sized employers. And what we recently launched is just an algorithm around people like you. And what we find sometimes is investors, especially ones who are new to the world investing, sometimes, you know, they'll become, I'll say, even paralyzed by fear into inaction, or maybe making, you know, not the best choices. And so what we've done now is just used a machine learning algorithm to identify cohorts of investors, and then we can match that to say, look, if you're coming in new, here's what other people like you are doing. Here's how they are investing. It's one of the core principles that we adhere to in our approach to AI ethics. And one of the things we really think differentiates us is by saying, hey, it's not that I'm going to recommend this fund to you and you have no idea why. Instead, I can say, well, look, based on these demographic characteristics that you've given to us, which is your age, your marital status, your family status, we know something about your income, I can break you into a cohort of similar situated people and say, here's what people like you, Here's how they are investing. Allow you to make the decision. We offer up the data very transparently. And I think that's a good balance of providing insights to individuals that's helping them make better decisions, but doing it in a very transparent manner. And that's the type of topic that we brought to the AI Ethics Board and wrestled around, like how far up that continuum do we feel comfortable pushing?
It's a wonderful example of using sort of data and machine learning, not just to throw up the recommendation, but actually throwing light into on what basis you're providing that recommendation, which I think goes back to your point about earning customer trust and bringing that transparency. So Don, one of the change that happened last year was around regulation. In response to pandemic, there was just a record pace of change in which regulations came out and changed, especially around sort of March, April timeframe. And with ADP supporting so many customers, can you please tell us a little bit about how you responded to that amount of change in regulation and help your customers remain compliant?
Yeah, it was unprecedented. As I mentioned, I've been with ADP 15 years. It's like nothing I've ever seen in my tenure here. Not just about the volume of regulation, but the speed with which it was coming, because obviously events were unfolding very rapidly during the early phases of the pandemic. The way it typically works in our business is when there are changes to tax or employment laws, they're usually made prospectively. That would start, we'll make the law now and it will take effect the next quarter or maybe even the next year. But because of what was happening on the ground, these changes were made retrospectively. So for instance, the FFCRA Act was passed the last week of March for the quarter ending March. So unlike a usual period where, okay, we see the new law, we interpret it, maybe we have a period where we ask questions back and forth with the government, then we code the changes in and test them and they're ready to go for the next quarter. This one came out on a Friday, and then by the following week, it had already flipped over to the new quarter, and we had to have all of our programming changes done in order to start meeting that quarter's filing deadlines. But this is a global phenomenon. We had changes, I think we had over 2,000 regulatory changes in over 60 countries around the world as governments everywhere were responding rapidly to the pandemic, and in many cases using employers as a channel to help provide relief to their workers, their employees, and those clients in turn turned to us as their provider to help distribute that relief. So it was quite an unprecedented time.
Don, can you tell us a bit about what role AWS Cloud has played in your technology transformation and helping you respond to this pace of change?
Yeah, it's really in two phases. One is I talked about the volume of changes that we saw, and the other is speed. So on the volume side, if we're running, all of a sudden we have this huge spike in activity. In one case, again, driven by clients who were scrambling so that they could access our systems and information to help them apply for these loans. So having that elastic scalability to help us literally just scale up and down as the level of customer activity was reaching unprecedented levels was quite an advantage for us. And then the other was on the speed front. So as we think about some of the new products that we've put into place to help our clients manage through the pandemic, whether it's the Return to Workplace Toolkit or other products that we've offered to our clients, of course, we're deploying those all in the public cloud and leveraging the speed and the agility that offers us, not having to stand up our own infrastructure, not having to go out and go through lengthy build or deployment processes. We're talking about having to get new products in production in a matter of days or weeks and be able to do so with a capacity to enable unprecedented levels of client volume, in some cases unpredictable levels, because nobody really knew or understood what the impact was going to be.
Incredible in terms of just the agility to respond to the changes that are happening for your customers, while also dealing with changes to make sure that your employees and companies and technology remains productive and available as well. Don, as you look to the future, there are a lot of learnings, I'm sure, from the past year dealing with the change. What are some of the lasting changes that you see continuing as you look to the future?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think we're also, still seeing more change to come, even as we go forward here. A few things come to mind that, one of the obvious ones is from a business continuity and a resiliency perspective, obviously being, much more expansive on our thought process there. We'd had various disaster scenarios that we had tested out internally through our systems. I don't know that we had tested a years-long global pandemic, so we managed to fight our way through that one, but it does show on a go-forward basis for a company like ADP, where we consider ourselves to be one of those truly essential businesses. If you think about the amount of wages that run through our pipes and our systems. And I think the other one really is in terms of this discussion we've been having around the overall agility of our business and our business model. And I will say, in particular, we took advantage of a lot of the elastic capabilities enabled by having part of our footprint in the public cloud. I think we've already started to accelerate that because we've seen the advantages of having that type of environment as opposed to being more of a running our own data centers or colos. And then I think the third one will really be an acceleration of transformation, both from a digital perspective, but in our world also a paperless perspective. The idea of us still having to bring people into offices throughout the pandemic so that we could print out paper paychecks. Believe it or not, we still have millions of people who are paid via paper paycheck or other types of payroll registers. I think the transformation of the ADP of the U.S. economy into a more digital economy is going to be accelerating quite rapidly here, and I think ADP is going to be a critical player in that role, transitioning more to all digital currency, all digital payments. We've started building out our own digital payment infrastructure to enable that, especially for workers who may be unbanked or underbanked or might not have otherwise had access to traditional financial channels.
Fantastic, Don. Thank you so much for sharing those insights with us today and your time today. That was really helpful. And I wish you all the best to you and ADP in your continued journey to transformation. Thank you once again.
Oh, thank you. It was a pleasure talking with you.